Before the names, before the walls, before the gods had temples to sit in, there was Sumer. It did not begin with fire, it began with water. Dark, endless water, still, cold, waiting. And from the stillness came shape, land rising like a whisper from the deep, as if remembering something lost. Then came the rivers, two veins carved into the clay of the world, Tigris and Euphrates. They did not roar, they hummed. Between them, a breath, a cradle. The first people stepped from silence, not with flags nor words, only sky above and sacred mud beneath. They shaped the earth not to conquer, but to remember. This was not yet history. It was the breath before memory, the hush before time. Where the rivers slowed, the people stayed. They gathered not in conquest, but in stillness. They built without blueprints. They shaped clay into shelter as if they had done so before, in dreams. The village did not rise like a city. It unfolded like a memory. There was no king, no throne, only a fire, a circle, a rhythm of breath shared between those who remembered the silence. They called the place nothing, but we now call it Eridu. Not a capital, not yet, but the seed of all that would follow. Walls came not for war, but to hold warmth in the night. Steps were carved not to reach gods, but to anchor their presence. And so in the lowlands between rivers a home was formed, not of stone and pride, but of mud and reverence. The first gathering, the first center, the breath beginning to speak. From mud they built homes, from the same mud they began to write. Not with ink or quill, but with pressure and silence. They pressed lines into clay, slow, deliberate strokes, not to decorate but to remember. They recorded grain, not glory, flood dates, not fables. And yet, memory awakened. Each mark was a rhythm, each tablet a heartbeat. They carved not just trade, but time. A moon's turning, a season's return, the names of rivers and prayers not meant to be spoken aloud. And when these clay tablets hardened in the sun, they outlived the hands that shaped them. Stone would crumble, wood would rot, but clay remembered. So came the first voice of humanity, not sung, not shouted, but whispered into mud, cuneiform. The first breath of history, pressed into the earth by those who feared forgetting more than they feared death. Before temples, before priests, they had the sky. Each night it returned, not in chaos but in pattern. The stars did not wander, they circled, they echoed, they spoke in silence. And so the people watched. They counted the moon's glow, the flood's rhythm, the breath between seasons. From this they carved time, not in sand but in stone. They raised towers not to reach heaven but to hold it still. The ziggurat was not a monument, it was a question. Each layer, a step between flesh and flame. Each ascent, a breath closer to where the gods might be listening. And though no one remembers the first prayer whispered from its summit, the stone remembers, the stars remember. And so the silence continues, stacked brick by brick, in sacred symmetry beneath the sky. Before laws, before kings, there were offerings. A cup of grain, a jar of oil, the breath of incense rising into dusk. They did not worship out of fear. They gave because the world had given first. The ziggurat was not empty, it sang. Drums echoed in its chambers, fire danced on its altars. And as smoke curled toward the stars, so too did the people's voices. Not in chants, but in presence. They offered silence, sweat, even blood when the rains would not come. But never for punishment, only remembrance. They poured wine into the dust so the gods would remember thirst. They broke bread into rivers so the flood would remember kindness. In ritual, they did not beg. They remembered the shape of balance. And the gods, if they came at all, came quietly, in the crackle of fire, in the weight of air, never seen, always near. The ziggurats have fallen, the rivers have shifted, the cities lie buried beneath layers of forgotten names. But the dust remembers. Somewhere in the silence of stone, the old songs still breathe. The tablets, though cracked, still hold the lines pressed by trembling hands. The symbols remain, not loud, not whole, but humming like echoes in a cave. The wind sweeps across empty courtyards. No voices reply, but something listens, something beneath. Sumer did not vanish. It faded, like light at dusk, like incense at the end of a prayer. Its breath still lingers in every law written, every city named, every word ever carved. Not a ghost, a root. Not myth, but memory. Too ancient to speak, too sacred to forget. In the beginning there were no kings, only watchers, workers, wanderers. But the gods grew quiet, and so men began to speak for them, not with truth, but with order. One man rose, not by sword, but by word. He held the laws, the harvest, the calendar, the prayers, and the people gathered around his tent, then his house, then his throne. He did not call himself divine. He called himself chosen, chosen to speak between the silence of stars and the hunger of men. The first kings did not command, they remembered, and through remembrance they ruled, not by fear, but by rhythm, like the river, like the moon, like time itself. Uruk did not rise with conquest, it grew like a memory, rehearsed through generations. It was not built, it awakened. Streets traced where footsteps had already walked. Walls formed where silence once settled. It breathed, slow and wide across the banks of the Euphrates. Not of stone, but of clay and will. Its alleys were arteries, its gates lungs. The city had no heart, because it was one. Ziggurats rose not as towers, but as spines. And around them, the body moved. Merchants called without words. Potters sang without voices. Scribes scratched time into dust. The people of Uruk did not conquer their world. They organized it. They gave shape to chaos, gave rhythm to labor, and gave walls to the wind. Uruk dreamed in brick. To rule a city was not to wield power, it was to hold balance. Balance between river and flood, between hunger and storehouse, between noise and prayer. The king was not the strongest, but the most still. He sat not above the people, but within their need. Clay tablets held laws, not for punishment, but for memory. Let this man pay 3 jars of barley. Let this woman keep the field of her father. No gold, no sword, only grain, brick, and time. Justice was not swift. It was patient, heavy like clay before it dries. And those who wrote the rules first learned how to listen. They carved truth in the same mud that built their homes. So when law came to Sumer, it came not as chains, but as rhythm. The stars did not shimmer, they returned. Night after night, season after season, their patterns curved through the black. The Sumerians watched, not in wonder, but in calculation. They did not worship the sky, they measured it. The moon's phases told when to sow. The sunrise behind a ziggurat told when to flood. They counted days in 60s, cycles within cycles. They did not invent time. They remembered it. They built calendars not on paper, but in sky and brick. Each temple aligned with a moment. Each shadow marked a rule. And so history began, not with myth, but with orbit. Uruk was not just walls and roads. It was heartbeat, harvest, heat. But no rhythm lasts forever. The sky changed, the wind shifted, the river ran too high, then too low. Storms came, not as punishment, but as reminder. Fields cracked under sun, storehouses emptied into open hands. The king could not command the clouds, so they turned inward. Temples grew taller, prayers grew longer. The people lit fires through the night, not for warmth, but for attention. The gods, it seemed, had forgotten or remembered too much, and so Uruk trembled, not with fear, but with waiting. Then came the flood, not myth, not punishment, but water beyond knowing. The river rose in silence, the bricks dissolved without protest. Homes turned to driftwood, temples turned to shadows, and the city became current. But clay remembers. Some tablets survived, buried in mud, sealed in time. Not all names were washed away. Not all stars were forgotten. When the waters fell, what remained was not ruin, but memory. Not silence, but seed. And from the silt of that great forgetting, Sumer would rise again, older, quieter, and listening. Not all fell. Some rose from the mud, rebuilding what had been washed away. But they did not rebuild the same. Walls were made thicker, gates stronger, records more detailed. Fear, once scattered in smoke, was now written in policy. The city became careful. Where once it had breathed like a body, now it moved like a system. Temples counted what they once offered freely. Markets measured not trust, but tokens. The gods were still honored, but in fixed intervals, with fixed weights. This was no longer the Sumer of rivers and stars. This was the Sumer of ledgers and law. But in its cold precision, it endured. Through fire, flood, and dust, it remained. Beneath every wall lies a silence. Not absence, but memory. Even as cities rose higher, the ground remembered. Buried beneath new roads were the songs of those who came before. The bricks were new, but the dust between them was ancient. No one spoke the old names aloud, but the temples still faced the stars. The scribes still carved in cuneiform. The gods were quieter, but never gone. And in the echo of sandals on stone, you could still hear the breath of the first ones. Sumer lived not only above the ground, but beneath it. In the cracks, in the corners, in the places no law could reach. The Sumerians did not believe in gods above. Their gods lived here, on the ziggurat, by the river, in the fields of barley. Anu ruled the heavens, Enlil stirred the wind, Enki whispered beneath the water. Inanna rose with the morning star and walked among men, neither feared nor obeyed, but honored, like weather. They gave not commandments but cycles, not punishment but balance. Life was not separate from the divine, it was a thread in the same loom. Each birth, a star, each death, a return, and in every stone, the echo of a footstep not human but remembered. The gods did not visit, they were never gone. They told stories not to explain, but to remember. Gilgamesh did not seek glory, he sought the boundary between breath and silence. Enki did not conquer, he solved. Inanna did not forgive, she descended. Their myths were not fables, they were instructions sewn into time. How to mourn, how to plant, how to wait for rain. Each myth was a pillar, each ritual a key. They did not fear the gods, they feared forgetting the gods. So they sang, not in chorus but in structure. Not to be heard, but to echo forward, to now to you. When Inanna descended, she did not go in anger, she went to remember. Through 7 gates she passed, and at each she let go, her crown, her jewels, her robes, her voice, until she stood naked before the dust. The underworld did not scream, it waited, it did not punish, it preserved. And when Inanna returned, she was not victorious, she was changed. And so the people mourned with her, every season, every year. Not for her suffering, but for what she taught. That even the brightest light must kneel before shadow, that even the gods must descend. Gilgamesh did not seek power, he had it. He sought silence. He ran from noise, from walls, from kingship. He chased a man who had once survived the flood. He crossed mountains, deserts, and death itself. But in the end, there was no secret, only a garden, only sleep. He came home not with answers, but with breath. He carved his story in stone, not to be praised, but to be remembered. Not to teach immortality, but how to live while still mortal. And so the story continues, not upward, but inward. They offered not to be saved, but to be heard. A handful of barley, a drop of wine, a strand of hair. Not grand gestures, but memories wrapped in gesture. The gods did not answer with thunder. They answered with season and silence. And so the people kept offering, even when the floods came, even when the sun hid, even when the scribes forgot the words. The rituals remained, not because they worked, but because they mattered. And as generations passed, the hands changed. But the gesture, the quiet tilt of the bowl, the lifting of smoke remained. Offerings that echoed, not in heaven, but in dust. No one knows who sang it, the last hymn, the final offering. The voice was not strong, but steady, not youthful, but remembered. It rose from a crumbling temple, echoing through corridors that no longer held kings. There were no crowds, only dust. No torches, only stars. And still the voice sang, not to call the gods back, but to keep the thread unbroken. A song not for salvation, but for closure. And in that final note, the age did not end, it rested. Sumer fell, but it did not vanish. It dissolved, like salt into water. Its temples turned to soil. Its names passed through tongues like smoke, changing shape, never gone. Babylon rose, carrying its measures. Assyria marched, with its myths. Even the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans walked unknowingly on roads first carved in mud by Sumerian hands. The tablet became scroll, the ziggurat became tower. The gods changed names but not place, and through it all dust settled quietly. Like an old memory watching from beneath new stones, Sumer is not lost, it is inherited. We do not know their names, not the builder of the first wall, nor the woman who offered the first prayer at Eridu, not the child who first looked at the stars and whispered, "Why?" Their words are buried, their faces erased, but their breath remains, in systems, in scripts, in rituals long outlived. History remembers kings, time remembers gestures, and dust remembers all. Their silence is not loss. It is the foundation beneath us. Every stone we stack, every story we tell, we do it in their shadow. Stones do not speak, but they remember. They hold the pressure of footsteps long erased, the heat of hands that shaped them in fire, the vibration of chants once carved into their grain. Ziggurats, once alive with ritual, now slumber beneath sand, but listen closely, the steps still echo. Temples may fall, roads may vanish, but stones endure. And when we find them, we do not awaken them. They awaken us, because memory never truly dies. It hardens, it waits. Sumer is not gone, it breathes through our language. In every contract signed, every calendar hung, every story told in rhythm. We live inside systems they first imagined. We pray in forms they first whispered. We bury our dead in ways they once honored. And still, beneath museums and maps, beneath asphalt and steel, there is clay. Quiet, patient, waiting. This was the first civilization, not the first to build, the first to remember. And because they remembered, so do we. There are names we no longer speak, not forbidden, just lost. Buried beneath centuries of silence, not erased, but worn smooth like river stones. The wind calls them in broken syllables. The sand swallows their echoes before they reach the surface. No one remembers their faces, no statues bear their eyes. And yet, the feeling remains. A presence without shape, a name without sound, a memory too old to remember, but too sacred to vanish. Some temples remain, not as monuments, but as mouths. Their doors still open, but they no longer speak. Their altars still wait, but no one brings flame. And yet they breathe. The air inside is heavier, the silence thicker, as if something still listens from within. These were not buildings, they were vessels, and though empty now, they still echo with what once filled them: prayer, presence, and the soft weight of eternity. There is always one door left open, not for escape, but for return. In the oldest temples, a single arch faces the rising sun. No one knows who placed it, no text explains why. But every morning, light touches that threshold first, as if the gods might come back quietly with the warmth. The door does not call, it waits. It does not promise, it remembers. The last door faces east, and opens only for silence. The last flame has long gone. No smoke curls now, but beneath the thresholds, beneath the worn brick, ashes remain. Not warm, but sacred, carried by wind, settled in silence. When someone steps over, they do not know, but the earth does, because beneath every memory is forgetting, and beneath every forgetting is ash. And even ash remembers its fire. Some left their cities to find silence, to seek gods, to follow rivers no one had mapped, and they never returned. No word, no grave, only stories of a singer who walked into the mountains at dusk, of a priestess who vanished in the reeds with her offering bowl, of a builder who stepped beyond the horizon and faded into wind. They are not mourned, they are not worshipped. They are remembered, not by name, but by the absence they left behind. They are not written in books, but the sand knows them. It presses their names into stone. It folds their breath into wind. No monument bears their faces, but when the wind shifts through the ruins, you can feel them. Not as ghosts, as foundation. They are beneath every threshold. They walk between every shadow. The past is not behind us, it is below us, and the sand still speaks, for those who cannot. What if the first word was never lost? What if it still hovers, somewhere between the dust and the silence, waiting for someone to breathe it again? The Sumerians were not just builders of cities, they were builders of meaning. They took mud and made law. They took shadow and made worship. They took time and made rhythm. Each syllable they carved into clay was not just a record. It was a return to origin, a reaching back into the moment before form, when the world was only pattern and breath. They wrote with angles and pressure, not curves, because memory to them was weight. Each tablet bore not just words but gravity, the heaviness of truth preserved before invention, not poetry but permanence. And still we chase that first word. In our myths, in our rituals, in the hush before names. We try to speak what they knew, not with sound but with rhythm, with pause, with reverence. Because to speak the first word again is to remember not only Sumer, but what it means to be human. You do not have to walk ancient roads to return. You do not need to cross deserts or unearth stone. Sometimes to return is simply to close your eyes. The Sumerians left no doors behind, only thresholds. They did not build walls to keep us out. They built echoes that we might find our way back without stepping forward. When you light a flame, they are there. When you speak in rhythm, they listen. When you sit in stillness beneath the stars, they breathe with you. Not as ghosts, not as myths, as memory, pure and elemental. You return not by movement, but by attention. You return not with questions, but with stillness. Because the truth they carried was never meant to be understood, only felt. We walk on their breath. We build from their rhythm. And when we forget, it is not they who are lost, it is we who have wandered. But the breath remains, and to return without leaving is to let it fill your chest again. There is a word buried deeper than any tomb. It does not belong to language, it belongs to listening. It was first spoken not with the mouth, but with the breath of the earth itself, a vibration felt through clay, a pause between thunder and silence. The Sumerians did not try to define it, they built around it. They aligned their temples to its rhythm. They wrote tablets that curved toward its absence. And then they let it rest. It was not lost, it was placed. Like a seed under soil, waiting. Now when we dig we find tablets, walls, bones, but not the word. Because it is not written, it waits. Every time we speak their names, every time we walk between their ruins, that word listens. And one day, if we become still enough, quiet enough, true enough, it may speak back, not in sound, but in breath. There was once a river that knew the name of every star. It whispered them to the reeds as it passed. The Sumerians called it sacred, not because it gave water, but because it remembered. It knew when the gods wept. It knew when the moon turned away. It carried stories not written, only felt. But rivers, like people, can forget. As cities fell and voices silenced, the river began to lose its names. One by one they slipped away, washed downstream, settled in silt. Now, the river is still here, it flows, but it does not speak. Only the wind listens, only the stars remember. And still, if you sit at its bank and close your eyes, you may hear it murmur one name, not yours, not mine, but one older than memory itself. Some stayed when others fled, not out of fear, but out of faith. They climbed to rooftops, to towers, to the very top of the ziggurats, and watched the sky. They were not priests, not prophets, they were listeners. Every night they watched the stars, not to control them, but to understand them, to feel their rhythm, to learn the breath of the heavens. Even when the cities burned, they did not look down. Even when the temples crumbled, they kept their gaze upward. Because in the end, they knew what was written above was older than fire, older than kings, older than even memory. And when the final flame died and the final gate closed, they looked up one last time, not with fear, but with peace. They did not disappear. They ascended in silence. There was no trumpet, no thunder, no scream, only a breath. The same breath that began it all. Not a breath of life, but of closure, of circle, of return. The Sumerians began with the earth, they ended with the wind. Between mud and dust, they left memory. The circle did not close with ruin, it closed with silence. One by one the tablets were sealed, the doors barred, the fires allowed to fade, but none of it was panic. It was reverence. They knew that the first to speak must also be the last to exhale. And when the final breath left the city, the dust did not rise. It settled. It did not scream. It whispered, and the whisper became wind, and the wind became time. There is a silence older than sound, not the silence between notes, but the silence before music was born. It lived in Sumer, in temples whose doors no longer open, where not even the wind dares to speak. It gathers in corners, in the cracks between bricks, in the breath that was never exhaled. This silence does not ask, it does not answer. It watches, it remembers. When people pass by the ruins today, they hear nothing, but that is not absence. It is presence, so full, so complete, that it leaves no room for sound. The Sumerians once whispered their gods into being. Now the silence carries their names with a gentleness that only time can master. You cannot speak into it, you can only listen. And if you are still enough, you might feel it rest on your shoulders. Not like weight, but like memory. A memory too sacred to rise, too holy to be disturbed. Where no wind speaks, the story still lives. Every civilization wants to be remembered, but not all leave behind a name. Some leave rhythm, some leave silence. The Sumerians left dust, not dirt, dust made of meaning. On every stone, in every breath of wind, between each layered wall, there is a residue, a trace, not strong enough to shout, but too powerful to fade. Their name cannot be spoken, it can only be gathered, in the way the light lands on ancient brick, in the hush between the drip of water in a dry well, in the way your skin tingles when you step where they once prayed. Dust is not decay. Dust is the alphabet of memory, and their name was not meant to be carved in stone. It was meant to return to dust, and from dust enter us, so that we unknowingly carry them. We think the past is behind us, but it moves through us, not like memory, but like breath. The Sumerians do not speak to us in language. They speak in echoes, in the rhythm of our tools, in the hush before we sleep, in the dreams we wake from, remembering things we never lived. We carry their echoes in the bones of our cities, in the firelight of our rituals, in the curve of our questions. Every time we draw a circle, every time we build upward, every time we write to remember, we are repeating something ancient, not copying, but resonating. Echo is not repetition, it is recognition. You may not know their names, but your hands remember their shape. You may not pray to their gods, but your breath still matches their rhythm. Because what they gave us was not culture, it was cadence. And that cadence continues, not through song, but through being. There are stories that end with a word, and stories that end with a silence. But some stories never end. They become air, they become gesture, they become presence. The story of Sumer does not close with a ruin. It expands beyond brick, beyond temple, beyond even time. It lives in the act of remembering, in the pause between thoughts, in the rhythm of creation. You have not just listened, you have returned, not to the past, but to the breath beneath it. And when this story finishes, it does not stop. It changes shape, it follows you, into your thoughts, into your silence, until one day someone asks who were the first, and you exhale, not an answer, but a beginning. You were not just listening, you were remembering, not because you lived in Sumer, but because Sumer still lives in you, in the pulse beneath your skin, in the hush before sleep, in the feeling that some places are familiar, even when your feet have never touched their soil. That is not fantasy. That is echo. Echo from a world that breathed rhythm before sound, that shaped thought before alphabet. You were there when the first tablet was pressed, when the first city opened its gates, when the first fire reflected in the first eye, not as a person, but as presence. Because some memories are not passed through blood, but through breath. Sumer is not only a place, it is a pattern, a vibration. And that pattern still hums inside you, quiet, waiting. So the next time you pause in silence, the next time a breeze feels older than the wind, The next time your hand moves without knowing why, know this. You were not just hearing the story. You were part of it. The story ends, only to begin again. Not in the same form, but with the same breath. The first light of Sumer is gone from the earth, but not from time. Its warmth still travels across deserts, across centuries, across memory. We call them myths, but they are breaths, still warm. The next story will not begin with conquest or gods or kings. It will begin with rhythm, with a drum, a fire, a shape in dust. And when you hear it, you will not recognize it, but your bones will. Because before the first word there was breath, and before the first light, there was you. There are cities you do not find, they find you, buried not by sand, but by silence. Beneath the ruins we see there is another city, one without walls, without names, not destroyed but hidden, by those who knew some things must not be remembered too easily. The city, beneath the silence, was not mapped, it was felt. A place where rituals left no fire, where tablets were buried still warm, where voices were silenced not in fear, but in reverence. It is said the priests descended not to die, but to preserve the breath of the beginning, and that the deeper you walk in ruins, the closer you are to truth. Not knowledge, but truth, that which cannot be taught, only inhaled. Every era has its builders, its kings, its scribes, but there was one who wrote nothing. He built the stone walls, but left no signature. He mapped the stars, but did not name them. He taught the children the sacred rhythms, and watched them forget his face. He was not forgotten. He was never known. But they say, in every true creation, a shadow leans slightly inward, like a breath held back. That shadow belongs to him, the one who knew that the greatest offering is to build something you will never be praised for. And because of him, the Sumerians remembered, even when they forgot everything else. After the temples cracked, after the fires dimmed, after the last footsteps faded from the gate, the dust settled. But what remained was not ruin, it was arrangement, as if the silence had chosen where every stone would fall. The city was not buried in chaos. It rested, like a breath exhaled and left to sleep. Wind moved slowly through the broken arches. The walls hummed, not with voices, but with memory. And in that stillness, the shape of what once was became more clear than ever. There were no names left, no songs, no titles. But the city still had posture, still had poise. It knew what it had been, and it did not mourn. Because when breath leaves the body, it does not cry. It becomes wind, it becomes dust, and both return. Before writing, there was clay. It watched everything. It felt the first hands press shape into meaning. It held warmth from ritual fires, soaked up prayers, and dried in moonlight. It listened, but never spoke. It bore the weight of kings, the tears of widows, the laughter of children lost to time. Every tablet we find, every brick we lift is not just artifact. It is witness. Clay does not lie. It remembers. Even now, as it crumbles in our hands, it looks at us with quiet understanding, as if to say, I was there before you, and I will be here after. They did not write to be remembered. They wrote so that we would remember ourselves. Every mark in clay was a breath made solid. They didn't sing for applause. They sang so that silence wouldn't become forgetfulness. When they built temples, they weren't building for gods. They were building places where breath could echo, where we could return, not in body, but in rhythm. Each fire they lit was not to illuminate the night. It was to reflect the faces of those yet to be born. They carved the stars, not to command them, but to align the sky with the soul. And every time we tell their story, even in a whisper, we inhale what they exhaled. We are not speaking of them, we are speaking with them. The truth is simple. Sumer never ended. It transformed into words, into ritual, into silence between questions. You can still feel it in the weight of a story whispered at night, in the hush before dawn, in the pulse behind your thoughts. The names have changed, the cities have crumbled, but the breath remains. We write now with pixels, but the rhythm is the same. We build new towers, but they still reach skyward. We wonder where we come from, And Sumer smiles. Because we never left, we only forgot. And now we remember. The breath continues.